President, please be seated. The court is now back in session. The floor will then be given to Nunchi's defense team to put question to Ruchampton and Mr. Witness. Before I hand over the floor to Nunchi's defense team, I'd like to remind you that please listen carefully to the questions put to you, and if you are not sure of the question, please ask them to repeat it. And please limit your response to the question put to you, trying to avoid any unnecessary comment which are not relevant to the questions put to you. Nunchi's defense, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, everyone. First, just to clarify something, is that technical issue, has that been resolved? You mentioned this morning that there was some trouble with the documents on the screen. Has that been resolved?
The President said the technical problem with the IT unit has been resolved, so you can proceed.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Witness. I will be as brief as possible this afternoon. However, as you do appear to be a man with quite a bit to say about quite a number of things, I may need to take a little longer than I normally do, but I hope you'll bear with me, and I will try to speak very, very slowly. And just to give my friends on this side of the stage an indication, I think I will finish in about 1 hour. That's my estimation. So first of all, Mr. Witness, I'd like to ask you some questions about B1. And before I do that, just let me begin with your position at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and that's so-called Office B1. And just in terms of orienting my questions to you, I'd like to very quickly just recapitulate a few things that you've told us already. First of all, you mentioned that you were the head of the B1 administration section and that you were overly in charge of the administration there. Is that correct?
Response, yes, that is correct.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. And this was covered partially this morning by Judge Laverne. I just want to reiterate it again. As the head of the administration at B1, you were overly in charge of psychologically, and that's the point Judge Laverne covered, and politically controlling or administering the people there at B1. Is that also correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you. And finally, on these preliminary points, you were personally engaged, you told us, in the process of selecting certain people who were assigned to work at B1. Is that also correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. Now I'd like to ask you some specific questions regarding certain former members of Office B1, some staff members. I don't think I'll need to make reference to any documents, but I'll try my best not to. First of all, Mr. Witness, was there someone in the office at B1 while you were there, while you were in charge, who went by the alias of Mut? And forgive me if I'm mispronouncing that. Mut.
Yes, there was a person by the name of Mut.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. What was that individual's full name, or what is that individual's full name, if that individual is still with us?
At that time, at the ministry, in the office, in the ministry, it was known as Bom Mut. And his official name is the current Excellency Kit Chon.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. What was his position at B1, Kit Chon, the man you just mentioned?
At that time, he was responsible for writing speeches. That was part of his responsibility, that is, writing speeches.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. Did he have any other responsibilities within the office that you know of?
When there was a delegation, he had the duty to engage in the negotiation and keeping the records.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. Could you give us an example of some of the negotiations that he was involved in? For example, to your knowledge, did he ever attend a round of border talks with Vietnam?
At the time, there was no border negotiation. It was mainly dealing with the Chinese delegations and some diplomatic corps who had their diplomatic representatives in Democratic Cambodia.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. Was Mr. Kit Chon involved in formulating any particular policies that you know of?
He was dealing with the diplomatic corps, with the speeches, also the speeches to be represented at the United Nations and at the non-aligned countries.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. Following up on that question, did Mr. Kit Chon accompany Norodom Sihanouk to a meeting in New York with the Secretary General of the United Nations at the time? That was Mr. Kurt Waldheim. Are you familiar with that trip that he took to New York?
I didn't know whom he wants to see. I might have heard that name through a radio broadcast, but I was not familiar.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. Another witness in this case has testified before this chamber that if Keat Chon had to be removed from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, that is, it would grind to a halt. Based on your position as the head of the administration at B1, do you agree with that assessment?
The President witness, please wait. The chamber will first hear the objection raised by the prosecution. The prosecution, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Our objection is that is a misstatement and mischaracterization of that testimony. So if counsel wishes to put some prior testimony to the witness, he should specifically quote and cite from the record, because that is certainly not my recollection of what the testimony was.
Thank you. I'll rephrase that question. Mr. Witness, if Keat Chon had been removed from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, would it have ground to a halt, or would there have been significant repercussions?
The President, the lead co-lawyer for civil parties, you may proceed. Good afternoon, Your Honors, Mr. President. This is a hypothetical question. President, the objection raised by the lead co-lawyer for civil party is valid. Mr. Witness, you do not need to respond to this question.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. If I may be allowed to respond to the objection, it seems like there's no point now, but for the record...
It's been ruled.
Well, thank you very much. Then, just for the record, let me say that, first of all, it's been our stated position all along that what was happening in democratic Kampuchea at levels below the so-called upper echelon is highly relevant to the larger question of the general manner in which DK operated. And I don't think there was anything inappropriate in the question I just asked. Now, of course, you preemptively sustained that objection, so I will move on to my next question. Mr. Witness, the closing...
The President, please make your time effective to put question to the witness. Put relevant questions to the witness in relation to the facts charged and alleged in the closing order. You are not authorized to stand on your feet to make comments. Don't avoid any questions which are not relevant to the closing order, the facts mentioned in the closing order, otherwise you will not be allowed to be on your feet or to waste the court's time.
Thank you very much for that useful clarification. I will do just that. Let me turn to the closing order. The closing order describes Mr. Keat Chon as a senior B1 cadre. Mr. Witness, based on your experience within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the kind of, how shall we say, the psychological assessments you were doing, you discussed this with Judge Leverin this morning, would you agree with that assessment that Mr. Keat Chon was a senior B1 cadre?
He was one of the senior cadres at the ministry. In particular, in dealing with the outside politics, as he had a lot of knowledge in this area.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. One last question about Mr. Keat Chon. based on your position as the head of the administration there, and again based on your psychological experience, do you know why Keat Chon refused to appear before the OCIJ to give testimony in this case? Is the government worried about him providing testimony? I see we have two objections.
The President, Mr. Witness, you don't need to respond to this question. It is not your role to reply to this question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, if I could just make my record, it's our position that an inquiry into the actions of certain individuals will greatly assist us and the Chamber, among other things, as to why those individuals have been reluctant to appear before this tribunal. And if I may just quote from two individuals who have been able to put this better than I have so far in this case. We are of the view that no reasonable trier of fact, and I'm quoting now, we are of the view that no reasonable trier of fact could have failed to consider that one or more members of the RGC, that's the Royal Government of Cambodia, may have knowingly and willfully
The President, are you putting questions to the witness, or are you running out of the questions? If you're running out of the questions, I'll hand over the floor to another defense team. Your questions are irrelevant to the facts in the closing order. The procedure of summoning this individual or that individual is beyond your capacity. And of course, the Chamber did not allow the witness to respond to such questions in the past. And if you prefer to make your submission, go ahead and do it in writing based on the Internal Rule 92 regarding the written submission, based on the procedures before the Chamber. And you can do that at any time until the conclusion of the hearing, which will be the time that you will make your closing statement.
Thank you, Mr. President. We will certainly take you up on that offer and make voluminous closing submissions. What I'm trying to do now is to make a record with respect to specific questions I'm posing, which are drawn directly from the closing order. Am I to understand the ruling of the bench that I'm not allowed to respond to objections or to make a record? Is that what you're telling me? Is that the position of this entire trial chamber, that objections are not allowed to be addressed on the record?
The Chamber just ruled in regards to the objection. But then there was no objection, but the Chamber exercised its discretion to avoid any unnecessary questions or comments which are not trying to ascertain the truth. The Chamber has given you the opportunity and the floor repeatedly to put questions to the witness at almost every stage of the proceeding when your team has the floor, before the floor is given to another team. Just then, we gave you the floor, that is the International Council for Nuon Chea, to put questions to the witness, and not to allow you to make any political statements or any comment at this juncture of time. And if you would like to do so, please examine Rule 92 of the internal rules. And I read that rules to you previously. Whether it is a submission based on the current proceeding or your written submission at the conclusion of the trial proceeding so that it can become part of the case.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will move on to another topic. Mr. Witness, yesterday morning, I believe it was just before the lunch break, and again, I believe just before we finally broke for the day, you referred to a Mr. Hornam Hong in relation to Bong Trebek. Now, if I'm not mistaken, in your second reference, you indicated that he had fled the country at some point, gone to France for some time, and then returned to Cambodia to occupy, and I had you down as saying, a very senior position here. Is that correct? Is that a correct, an accurate summary of what you've told the Chamber so far?
Response. This morning I stated that yes.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. Then my first question to you is, what position or positions, if any, did Mr. Hornam Hong hold within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs? B1.
While he was at the ministry, it was not that long. I believed it was in late 1978. So he was there only for a short period of time. He was a part of Bong Kitchon's group and Bong Chun Prasad as well.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. What about B32? What is B32? What does that mean to you?
B32 is a mobile office for the leadership.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. One more question, or another question, I should say. The witness I mentioned earlier, who has testified previously in this case, has testified here, and I'm quoting now, so far as I recollect, he, that's Mr. Hornam Hong, was the ambassador to Cuba, but he had been at B1 for a shorter period of time, but he spent a longer period of time at Bong Trebek. Does that seem like an accurate statement to you based on your experience at B1? Was Mr. Hornam Hong, did he spend a longer time at Bong Trebek?
Yes, that is correct. He was at B1 for a short period of time, but before he went to the ministry, I could not grasp his exact situation, but he was within the circle of the leadership.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. Was he ever the chairman or the vice chairman of Bong Trebek? That is Mr. Hornam Hong.
When the ministry representative went to receive him, He was in charge of the Bang Trop Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. One last question, again based on your administrative experience and your psychological talents. Do you know why Mr. Hornem Hong refused to appear before the OCIJ to give testimony in this case? Is the government worried about his testimony?
The President witness, you do not need to respond to this question. It is not at your role to do so.
Thank you. If I may just quote from something I've got in front of me here. Further investigations are warranted for two reasons. First, the Chamber is under an obligation to ensure the integrity of the proceedings is preserved. And number two, preventing testimony from witnesses that have been deemed conducive to ascertaining the truth may infringe upon.
The prosecution, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I believe counsel is making a submission and reading from a PTC decision, which is not the purpose of why we're here. Counsel should be well aware that it is a completely inappropriate question to ask a witness to speculate on the government's position on people testifying. And further, he has raised the issue of the court not entertaining arguments. It is quite common in courts not to hear sustained argument on every objection. If we did that, we would never finish trials. When counsel asks questions that are knowingly improper, I think it is entirely appropriate for the court to rule on objections without hearing sustained argument.
Well, I obviously disagree with that position. I think it's our right to make a record and to make it known. And just for the record, that was, in fact, a quote from a PTC decision. In fact, it was the dissenting opinion of former judge, Catherine Marchi-Uel and Mr. Rowan Downing, Judge Rowan Downing. That was indeed a quote from their dissenting opinion. And just let me add again, for the record, an inquiry into the past actions of certain individuals will assist us and the Chamber in understanding why they have been reluctant to appear before this tribunal and why the government, the royal government, has actively encouraged them from doing so. And we do adopt the position of the PTC judges I just mentioned, for the record. And now if I could move on to a document. Excuse me. If I could just ask for some clarification. I heard Mr. Lysek say, I wasn't sure if he said annoyingly or knowingly, but I certainly am knowingly putting these questions. I intend to do that.
The President, the objection raised by the prosecution is sustained. Counsel, you are reminded that the time given to you is to put questions to the witness. Again, if you intend to make a submission, you have to do it pursuant to Rule 92 of the ECCC internal rules.
Thank you, Mr. President. If we could turn now to a document. Mr. Witness, do you recall giving an interview or being interviewed by certain investigators, members of the organization DCCAM, that's the Documentation Center of Cambodia? Did you ever give a statement to anyone from DCCAM?
Response: I never gave interview to people from DCCAM.
Thank you. Just let me ask you a few questions. And your name is Pipun, correct?
Response: Yes.
Excuse me. And you also go by the name Rochun Tun, or Tum. I believe we've been referring to you by that name in court.
Response: Yes, that's my name.
And have you ever gone by the name Chiem? Forgive me if I'm mispronouncing that. Chiem, as it's transliterated in English.
Response: Yes, I do also use that name.
Thank you, Mr. President. If I could have a document put before the witness to perhaps refresh his recollection as to whether or not he's given an interview to anyone from DC Cam. I'm referring now to document, excuse me, document number E190.1.406. And that, as we're all well aware, I think, has been on the document interface for some time in all three languages. It's a document, I believe, proposed by the prosecution. I don't see any reason why it should not be utilized here in court. Could we please put that document to the witness?
The President, co-prosecutors, could you please confirm whether the document is listed in the proposed document by the prosecution?
Yes, I can confirm that it was. It was originally listed as a new document because the interview was conducted after the judicial investigation was completed, and it was the subject of a court ruling on new documents. I believe that E190, paragraph 38 and 39, ruled that document could be added to the case file. So we don't have any objection to this document being placed before the court and before the witness.
The President, you may now proceed, counsel.
Thank you, Mr. President. If I can just get this over with so we can get into the substance, let me just read out the ERN numbers here. That's English 00660621 through 00660651. Khmer 00660820 through 00600874, and French 00754243 through 00754297. I think a hard copy has just been put before the witness. I've got 4 questions on this particular document. Well, actually, let me start. Mr. Witness, you have that document in front of you now. I see you looking at the cover page. Do you see your name listed there at the top of the... Could you turn back to the cover page, please? Thank you. And let me just read to you what it says in English, and then you can tell me if you agree with this. Interview with Rochum Tun, alias Pipun, and Chiem, male, age 63. Interview at Dong Village, Malai Commune, Malai District, Banteay Meanchey Province, 19 December 2010. Interviewed by Long Danny, translated into English by Ten Sok Sriniat, if I'm pronouncing those words correctly. And at the very bottom of the page is the footer, which reads Documentation Center of Cambodia. That's the DC CAM organization I was referring to before. Does this refresh your recollection at all, Mr. Witness, about this interview that you seem to have given to the DC Cam individuals I mentioned.
Response. I don't think that I met these people concerning this document. The documentation center of Cambodia didn't meet me regarding this document.
Okay, Mr. Witness. In that case, let's try it step by step. Let's turn to page 20. Excuse me. Strike that. Let's turn, if we could, to page 14 in English. That's the English ERN is 00660634. I've got the Khmer ERN here as 00660845. I apologize, Judge Levin, I don't have the French, and I apologize to Ms. Simonofor and my colleagues here on this side of the stage, of course. This is page 14 in English at the bottom of the page. I think we can put that on the screen. Mr. Witness, it appears that you are having a discussion with the interviewers about some certain reassignments. And let me just read what it seems that you've said. The question was, do you know the reasons for these reassignments? And your answer was, yes, I do. The assignment of new cadre to oversee the southwest region caused mass killings. Many of them were proud and rigid. Tom Mok is a bad person. I hate him. In 1979, there seemed to be a heated argument over the management of the southwest region, in the southwest region, where Tom Mok built up cruel cadres to commit execution. Does that sound like something you would have said? Do you recall making that statement?
Response. Normally, when I met with people, I could have recorded their names. I think the document has taken me by surprise because I have never known the person by the name Dani as in the document.
Well, let me try this, Mr. Witness. Did you ever say that Tom Mok was a bad person, or did you ever make those comments that I just read to you, or something of a similar nature?
Response. I think I was talking during the Mok funeral from Phnom Penh to An Long Wang. I did not know that the people from the Searching for the Truth magazine coming to see me, but I did say something about this. I said the Mok in 1977 and 78 it was in my statement that so far there was evidence from the zones who were victims that during that year the cadres from the southwest executed people from all zones, people from northeast, north, northwest, 304, and the west. These cadres were executed by cadres from Tamok zone.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. Would you stand by the statement that you seem to have made that you thought Talmok was a bad person and that you hated him?
Response. I and Tamok had some contradictions. He looked down on me as an ethnic minority group, and I also had argument with him. I accused him of being a Khmer, but then why he started executing a lot of cadres? The contradiction was intensified. There was almost a kind of riot against him, and I said very clearly that I had nothing to be afraid of Tamok. He was a human being like I am, and I really respected the party's line, but as a person, individually, people could fail to respect individual rather than the political the line. And I met a lot of people from my district said that cadres from the southwest zone were very heinous, very cruel. They killed a lot of people. So I said that people who was the most the worst human being during the democratic Cambodia was no one other than Tamok, and it's the truth. From 1979 onwards, when I left Phnom Penh, I went to Tropang, Cho, Oral, and other locations. I observed that people along the areas I passed were living in very difficult conditions, and people from the east were all smashed, and I saw this. And we from Phnom Penh were about to be killed by Tamok forces, but we came with forces. That's why they couldn't do us. And we heard people exchange verbal arguments. The President intervenes. Witness, could you please hold on? Please try to regain your composure and be ready to respond to questions. Counsel, you may put more questions to him.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Witness. I certainly didn't mean to upset you. One last question on Talmok, and I hope this doesn't give you a hard time. Would you consider Talmok to be a warlord with respect to his management of the Southwest Zone?
The President, witness, could you please hold on, wait until we hear from the prosecutor before you proceed. Co-prosecutor, you may now proceed.
Mr. President, I object to that question. It's a little vague. I think counsel should specify what he means by warlord so the witness knows what he is responding to. I think that different people could interpret the term warlord in different ways.
I think that's quite fair. I'll move on to another document briefly for a moment. I'll move away from this DC cam interview, I'd like to come back to it. If we could show the witness, and I'm looking now at document E3/24, formerly D91/10. This is one of the witness's previous statements to the OCIJ. This has already been used in court here, I think, so I don't know if I need to go through all the litany of numbers, or do I? Yes, okay. I'm getting a nod from Judge Cartwright. I'll just quickly read those out. That's, excuse me, E324. It's a written record of interview of Mr. People and the witness, and that's English ERN 00. Can't see that. 2223578 through 00223. French ERN 005093917 through 005039299, and Khmer ERN 0020466 through 0020475. Excuse me. Turning very briefly, if we could actually, yes, put this document before the witness. Thank you. I think you've seen this before already in court, Mr. Witness. Very briefly, if we could turn to page 9, and that's English ERN 00223586, Khmer 00204073, and I apologize again, this time first to my colleagues here and to all the French speakers in the room. I don't have the French ERN, but this will be very brief. Mr. Witness, about the middle of that page, you were talking about zones, and you said each zone had a leader like a warlord. Maybe you could just tell us in your own words what you meant by the word warlord. What does that word mean to you?
Response. Warlord, I refer to Tamok because he killed cadres from the southwest. Rather, he really brought cadres from the southwest to kill in other zones.
Thank you very much for that answer. If we could go back now to that DC Cam interview, I hope you still have it in front of you there. I've got three more questions on that, and then that should be all for me. Do you still have it in front of you, Mr. Witness? Mr. Witness, have you still got the DC Cam interview that we were discussing before in front of you? Oh, sorry. I apologize for being impatient. So, Mr. Witness, we're looking now, or I'm looking now, and I think you are as well, at page 29, and that's English 0066 0649, Khmer 0066 0870. Very briefly, on this page, you mentioned something about the win-win policy of the Prime Minister, and you note that it's very effective. What is the win-win policy?
The President, witness, could you please hold on? Wait until we hear from the International Co-Prosecutor. International Co-Prosecutor, you may now proceed.
Yes, Mr. President, we'd object to this being outside the scope of the closing order issues that are at play here. A lot of this DC Cam interview deals with post-79 events in Cambodia, including the question that counsel is asking now, so we would object to the relevance of this to the current trial.
If I may very, very briefly respond, Mr. President, obviously we take a slightly different position in terms of context and relevance. Let me try to rephrase my question in a way to make it very clear what I'm saying. As far as you know, Mr. Witness, does the win-win policy include as one of its key components a firm commitment to bury the past of former Khmer Rouge members other than Doik and the 3 men on trial here today? Are you aware of that firm position on the part of the royal government of Cambodia, Mr. Witness?
Response. This win-win policy was meant to serve the interests of both sides. Everyone won. For that reason, we have peace until these days. And I am satisfied. The context is appropriate. It was suitable for that period of time, and it's still suitable for the future situation.
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Witness. Does that mean you agree with the proposition that I put to you, that one of the key components of that policy was to bury the past of former Khmer Rouge members other than Doik and the 3 gentlemen on trial here today? Is that how I should understand your answer? As an agreement with that position?
The President, witness, could you please hold on? International Co-Prosecutor, you may now proceed.
Yes, sorry to interrupt again, but the witness's view or understanding is one thing, but whether the witness personally agrees or disagrees with the policy is totally irrelevant to the proceedings here.
Thank you. I'll just respond to that briefly, then move on. Our position, given this witness's stated past, his background, his psychological training, his proximity to the government, his knowledge of key government figures, all these things that we've been talking about today, I think they put him in a very, very unique position to comment on the remark I just made. But again, let me just state for the record that we take the position that the government's motives for blocking testimony and limiting the scope of trials is quite relevant. But let me move on to my third point. And we're staying with his DC Cam interview, Mr. Witness. So if we could turn to page 26.
The President, the objection is sustained. The question put was not within the scope. Witness is instructed not to respond to that question.
I'm sorry, Mr. President. I just assumed that was sustained. I apologize for not waiting. Let me move on to my next question, and that's page 26. As I mentioned, that's English 00660646, Khmer 00660865. And now, Mr. Witness, this is the same interview that we've been talking about. And on this page, you made a reference to the K5 mobilization located along the Thai-Cambodian border. And you briefly described that as being filled with mines and spikes. First of all, what is the K5 mobilization? Could you please explain that for the court? But please wait, we have 2 objections on the other side of the stage here.
The President, witness, you are instructed not to respond to the current question by counsel for Nuon Chea because it is not relevant at all to the alleged facts.
Thank you, Mr. President. If I could just make a reference to document number E131-1-9, and those are our being the Nuencia defense team, objections, observations, and notifications regarding various documents to be put before the trial chamber. That document of 14 November 2011. And at paragraph 3 in that document, let me just quote this. According to the modified indictment, under the rubric devoted to crimes against humanity, the alleged criminal system implemented in DK resulted in millions of victims. Though rarely discussed openly in this country, it has been publicly reported that upwards of 50,000 individuals may have died in the implementation of the so-called K5 plan, which took place shortly after the DK period, but well before any assessments of the regime's alleged death toll were undertaken. And as far as the defense is aware, none of those forensic inquiries took the potentially numerically distorting effect of the K5 episode into account. The defense, that's obviously us, I'm quoting still, has recently obtained certain documents indicating that Mr. Hun Sen may bear responsibility for the implementation of the K5 plan and any resulting deaths. And at the very least, he is...
The President, this matter is far outside of the fact, and you had already been informed. You have sung the song that has already been stated in the written statement, and if you wish to do so, you could do in writing, and you are not allowed to do that in this courtroom.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'll move on. I was just making the point about the relevance of that statement to our position on the death toll. We do take the position that it's relevant to an assessment of the death toll. Allow me, the alleged death toll.
The President, indeed, you're not allowed to dwell on that matter. You may proceed with questions. If no more questions, then we would hand over to other counsels.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm well aware of that. I'm trying to conserve some time for my colleagues here on this side of the stage. I did promise them quite a bit of our time. One last question, then, with respect to this document, this DC Cam interview. And this will be my last one, Mr. Witness. If we could just look at page 2, and that's English ERN 00660622. Khmer ERN 00660821. And Mr. Witness, if I could just quote what you've said here. Are you still working for the question? Are you still working for the party? Yes, I am. Are you working for the Cambodian People's Party? Yes, I am a permanent member of the party. Is that an accurate statement of the fact? Mr. Witness, are you a permanent member of the CPP?
Yes, that's what I stated.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. And just my very last point, I noticed that following the S, the interviewers have included an exclamation point. Can we take that to indicate that you are not only a member, but a very enthusiastic one?
The President, Mr. Witness, you don't need to respond. It's nothing relevant to the alleged facts.
Mr. Witness, thank you for answering my questions. I've got nothing further. Thank you, Your Honors. I hand over to my colleagues now.
The President, the time is appropriate for a short recess. We will take a 20-minute break and resume at 10 to 3. Court officer, could you assist the witness and the duty counsel during the recess and have them back in the courtroom? through 3.
សូមអញ្ជើញក្រោកឈរ